Good afternoon, everybody. This is Judy Vaccaro, your 3-5 Science Virtual Teacher Specialist, and I'm here today to talk to you about the art of scientific argumentation. So our learning targets for this session are, the first one here is I can explain the importance of argumentation in the science classroom. So you're going to learn about why we have argumentation and how it supports our students' learning. I can give examples of argumentation skills that are being developed in grades 3 through 5. So you're going to learn our practices are a K-12 continuum of skills. So we have certain skills that are being developed in our grade, the 3-5 grade band. So we're going to talk about that today. And then we're going to also talk about the components of argumentation. What are the parts that make up argumentation, and how can we support our students in these using these components? So let's get started. So I don't know about you, but sometimes this is what argumentation looked like in my classroom, where students were holding on to dear life to their idea, and sometimes the argumentation really did look like an argument instead of a sharing and explaining and questioning of ideas. And I really feel like that dog in the middle, and I felt like I was more or less making peace instead of facilitating. So I hope you can relate. And if this is what it looks like and how you feel, I feel you. So hopefully by watching this webinar, you will have some ideas on how to support your students for the rest of this year and starting next year. So why is argumentation important? Well, first of all, for the nature of science, sense making is in science happens in communities. So scientists function in communities. Our classrooms are like communities. And argumentation is how our students and scientists work together to reach that consensus or make sense of a phenomena and build that scientific knowledge. So when they're doing this and in this process, questions come up and disagreements occur. So this practice in argumentation of evidence is how the science community, including our classrooms, settle these disagreements so that the strongest answers can be reached by the community or the group. So it also helps move the development of knowledge in science forward. So that's what I'm going to talk about next, is this scientific knowledge. So it's important for students to understand that science knowledge is really, it's not static, that it changes as new evidence is introduced, as scientists engage in this argumentation and reach these consensus. So oftentimes they're working with old ideas or revising an old idea, and they develop these new ideas over time. One thing I can think of is Pluto. So when I was growing up, Pluto was classified as a planet, and then Pluto was declassified as a planet. Now in modern day, our scientists are still trying to come up with some consensus, because some scientists say that Pluto is a planet and others are not so certain about that. So they're still up to debate. But again, that's an example of scientific argumentation and how an old idea is being challenged and changed with this new evidence. So this argumentation process, it helps students understand that these science ideas can be changed. and they can be revised. And this is key to understanding that nature of science. And this oftentimes I feel like is what frustrates our adults in the area of science, is that, you know, there's these constant new findings and things change. So it's really important that we kind of have our students understand that part, that science does change over time based on new evidence. So it also, with the application of core ideas and concepts, these allow students to develop those skills of critiquing and evaluating, which higher order thinking skills, for evaluating that evidence and explanations of phenomena. And it leads to what we ultimately want our students to graduate being scientific literacy, being literate in understanding the nature of our world and the nature of science. So what does this look like, and what can be expected in this 3-5 grade band? So there's certain skills that our students are building upon from grades K through 2. So in 3-5, so really by the end of 5th grade, we want our students to respectfully provide and receive critiques from peers about a proposed procedure. So they're planning an investigation, an explanation that they have, or maybe a model that they've developed to share their thinking. We also want them to cite relevant evidence and pose specific questions about the procedure, explanation, model. Another skill they're working on in this grade band is that they're working on distinguishing among facts that are reasoned by judgment based on research findings and speculation in an explanation. They're working on comparing and refining arguments based on an evaluation of the evidence presented. And they're using data to evaluate claims about cause and effect. And then they're constructing and or supporting an argument with evidence, data, and or a model. In engineering, this may look a little more specific, where they make a claim about the merit of a solution to a problem by citing relevant evidence about how it meets the criteria and constraints of the problem. So that's what the skills they're working on starting in 3rd grade, and what we want them to be able to do by the end of 5th grade. So our skill matrix, and I put an example in our resources for this webinar that goes over all of the all the practices and the skills they're developing in this grade band. So that will be in the resources for this webinar. So what are the components of scientific argumentation? Well, one of the components is this idea that's being questioned, and we call this idea a claim. The claim is, it's important for students to understand that this claim that's being stated is tentative, and it can change. So, and that may take a specific conversation with students, because I know they come in usually with having some idea about science and a particular topic. And some of those ideas could be misconceptions, and they really like to hold on to their misconception. And that's the way it is because of maybe some background, prior knowledge, or, they just haven't been challenged in that aspect. So it's important from early on that they understand that this claim we're centering around, well, it could change. Claims, they must be supported. So to communicate why should the idea be accepted, without support, there is little opportunity for ideas to be questioned and revised. So it's important that if they make a claim, that they say why, or they support it with a reason or with evidence. It's another component is that claims are evaluated and critiqued to identify the strengths and the weaknesses. And it's important to understanding is that students should critique the idea or the work, but not a student. That can shut down your argumentation if you have not purposely built that into your classroom community. And when I work with students I'm leading an argumentation discussion with our students, that is one thing I set up as a classroom norm, and I'm going to talk about that a little later as a strategy, that we're critiquing ideas or a claim, but not a student. And we'll talk about the reason why that's so important a little bit later on. And claims have to be reconciled. So in other words, there needs to be some kind of consensus reached by the community, the classroom, or the learners to make progress towards that understanding of that phenomena or the problem if it's an engineering task. So here are 3 strategies to support our argumentation in our classrooms. So one of these is language frames. So if your students are maybe not as familiar with this kind of classroom discussion or structure, language frames can kind of support them in this process. So I did include, sorry, I don't know what's going on there, but I'm going to go back here. So I did make some samples here, and that is the wrong link. I will put in some samples later, but language frames are just like another term you might have heard of is sentence starters. And I have made like sentence starters for a frame, and I will put that in our discussion thread so you can have that. Another thing are table tense, and let's see if I put the right link there. So I like to put these out. I copy these, and this is great if you're doing a paired type discussion or maybe even a small group discussion, and you divide the kids into partner A and partner B, and then they switch, and partner A has some guidance or sentence frames here, and partner B, so partner A is your idea explainer, so they're explaining their idea. And then partner B is the idea coach, where they're kind of asking them questions and finding out more, or again, agreeing or disagreeing or coming up with a consensus. And then they take this and they switch roles. And I like this idea because oftentimes when kids are working in groups, it's really beneficial to give them some specific jobs or roles in that group, and it really helps the functioning of the group when they're working collaboratively. Another thing that really works well are agree and disagree charts. So basically you can put this, you can use this electronically, or you can use this just on a piece, on your whiteboard or post-it paper on your thing, and just make a T-chart. Agree, disagree. You can use sticky notes, or you can write on your poster about points that the kids agree on and points that they're disagreeing and still working out. So that's another great strategy. And the last one is this discussion diamond. So this strategy is really great for holding to promote accountability in a group talk. So this explains what it is. So basically, there's room for 4 people in this strategy. So basically, everybody has a corner, and they write their ideas here. And they have like 10 minutes to write their ideas. And then, or you give them 3 minutes to think and write. And then once that time is up, each member gets to read and adds to what they wrote in response to maybe a question. And that's 4 minutes. And so for each person, and then they keep going around. And after all the students have shared what they put in their corner, one member records a summary of what the group discussed and agreed on or disagreed on, if that's the case. And the team works together to record it in 1 to 2 minutes. So this is really structured. Again, the first time you use this strategy, it might go a little longer, but once the kids get used to that structure of group talk, this could really help get some consensus going on between the groups. So I linked that in here, and of course you'll have access to that. And this will this web slide deck will be in our learning community. And the last thing that I really want to talk about and point out is this equity. In my classrooms that I've worked in, no matter what grade it's been, or what the situation was going on with the learners. Maybe some years I was the collaborative teacher, and some years I had students that were learning English, just varying learning needs. And it seemed like the same kids were doing all the talking. And I have this saying I say to myself, whoever's doing the talking is doing the learning. So I want to know what all my students think, and I want them to feel comfortable doing so and feel safe doing so. So some things to consider are awareness of a student's perspective and the culture that they are that they live in. So one thing you can do, some kids may feel very uncomfortable sharing an idea or disagreeing. It might be, intimidating for them. They might review it as disrespectful. In some cultures that can be viewed that way. So as a teacher, it's really important to keep that in mind while you're having these argumentations. So provide multiple ways and opportunities for students other than just those whole group discussions. Maybe consider using a technology tool like Flipgrid, where students can post their individual ideas, or maybe doing like that agree, disagree, where they can, post their ideas and, maybe their names aren't on it. So things like that. So don't always think of argumentation has to happen in a whole group situation or a small group situation or just in pairs. So offer that variety. Another thing is to really, from the get-go, from the beginning of your school year, is to establish some norms, some expectations for scientific argumentation and repeatedly discuss about them. So I put an example here of some that I have used in my classroom. I got these ideas from Open Science Ed, and I just made a poster of them. But notice I left like a blank here. Well, I start off with, these are my suggestions, but I also leave room for my students to kind of put their own agreements on here. I think it's really something that really helps, and they tend to hold each other accountable when it's things that they suggest and agree upon. So some of the things for our norms were that our class is a safe place to share ideas. Everyone's participation and ideas are valued. We learn together. and we work together to figure things out. So again, this will also be linked in our group. So you will have access to this, this example of classroom science norms for yours. You can, use that or make it your own. But I like to start off with that and have my students add to that. So for students that are learning English, argumentation has a very heavy language. It's very language intensive. So depending on where they are in that continuum of learning English, they may need more support at times as they learn to master the language. So some things you could do in your classroom to support them, and maybe some other learners that could use this, is to make that vocal question very clear and to write it or post it somewhere in your classroom. Using those sentence stems that relate to that vocal question is helpful for the kids when they're trying to formulate an oral answer, or sometimes even a written one, depending on how you're using those. It's also important for the teacher to record those agreements and disagreements somewhere in the classroom, like keep them posted, or if the kids are old enough, have them record the agreements and disagreements, either in a science notebook or somewhere where they can refer to, so they can keep up with what's going on in the classroom. And then also, it's helpful if the teacher revoices student ideas that state the main claims that the classroom is talking about and the questions that are coming back. So that sometimes kids can get long-winded, and teachers do such a great job of simplifying and refining and revoicing an idea and to make it clear. And sometimes it also helps with repetition, like just hearing it another time. So some of the references that I used here, the biggest reference, or the main reference, is this book called Helping Students Make Sense of the World Using Next Generation Science and Engineering Practices. And this is what the cover of the book looks like, and it's really helpful in understanding each individual practice. So if by chance you have access to this resource, I would definitely use this to help you understand more about science argumentation, but also the other 7 practices for science and engineering practice. And this matrix that I linked on our presentation is one I created just for grades 3-5. So I put it on here to share with you. Maybe you'll find this helpful. But I took all the practices and I put those skills expectations for each practice. So the first page is practices 1-4, and the second one is practice 5-8. And again, this was I put the source that I found these right here. I linked on that. That's a great resource as well. So I just want to thank you guys for watching this webinar, and please reach out to me via our learning community, or I put my my email address that you can actually email me to as well. And I know, like, this week is Teacher Appreciation Week, so thank you. I thank you is probably not enough for everything that you do every day, and I hope that you know how appreciated and loved you are by your students and by all your fellow educators for everything you do for the students that you teach, for education, and I hope that you have a great Teacher Appreciation Week. Thank you so much.